Thank you all for being here. I was looking to the left and the right, and there are women sitting there, and we have to say if there are businessmen. I think the time should come in Africa that you say business women. This is a continent where the women are going to make the difference. So I thank Delapo and the representative of the governor, Wale Oluo. Thank you for being here. As you always say in Africa, all protocol observed. I just love that because it sort of gets rid of everything else. And I'm glad that we have this opportunity to talk a little bit about sustainability in its broadest sense. You know, it's such a broad topic that it's very difficult to really summarize that in my next 15 to 20 minutes, and I won't even try to do that, but I'll share some thoughts with you that hopefully are useful for the panel. And we can talk anything you want when we have the discussions. But it's interesting that when I flew in here yesterday, we came from Kenya, actually. We've been in a tour of Africa. This is about my third visit to Nigeria in the last year and a half. So the importance is very well understood. And yesterday we were in Abuja talking with President Buhari and a little bit the future of this enormous potential that you have in this country. And I was at the airport and I saw 3 people sitting there. And I couldn't prevent myself from listening in. I know that's very unpolite. My parents always say, don't listen to other people speaking, but I know you all do, so I don't feel totally guilty. And soon I discovered that one was actually a doctor, one was an engineer, and one was an economist. And what they were talking about was they were bragging about who had the oldest profession on earth, you know. So this doctor said, I have the oldest profession, you know, because if you look at the book of Genesis, and Eve came out of the rib of Adam. Both patients survived. It was the first successful operation. Doctors have the oldest profession. Then the engineer said, I don't think so. Because at the time of when the universe was created, there was an enormous chaos, and out of chaos they created order to create the universe. And it's engineers that create order. So engineers must be the oldest profession. And then the economist said, I don't think so. I think we have the oldest profession. Because who created chaos in the first place? And I think we're a little bit in that time. The title of your conference is Leading in Volatile Times, if I summarize it very quickly. Many people, it's a coin from the US War Academy in Carlisle that has coined the term VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think that's the time that we live in. Now, I'm always reminded of the book of Charles Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities, which he wrote in 1853, I believe, where he talks about the two cities, London and Paris. But his book starts with, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. And we should start with the best of times. Never ever in the history of mankind has it been a better time to be born than now. People that are born now in this world are healthier, live longer, have more chances of education. If you're a woman, you have a higher chance of being included in the economic system. It is a good time to be in this world. But at the same time, there are enormous challenges that we need to address. Why are these challenges a little bit more now than in the past? I think very simply because some of the key trends are coming together that haven't come together before. And I could talk about many trends with you today, and including some specific trends for Nigeria, but I'm trying to lift this up to give you 3 of the broadest global trends. And because these trends are coming together, it creates a little bit more volatility. Change is accelerating, change is amplifying. The first one is the shifting power fields to the south and to the east. It used to be not long ago that about 90% of the world economy was in Europe and the US. And that has obviously changed dramatically, especially with the opening of the Far East, may I say, and the South, and the awakening, I think, slowly but surely now of Africa. The global economy is now far more balanced. Unfortunately, as we've become more global, which has lifted many people out of poverty, by the way, over the last 4 decades, 500 million people have been lifted out of poverty, more than any time in human history. The Millennial Development Goals, which were started in 2000 by one of your African brothers, Kofi Annan, not far from here in Ghana, where he set the objective in the year 2000 to half the number of people living in poverty. At that time, it was defined as $1.25 a day, and indeed, 15 years later, in 2015, that objective has been achieved. China being an enormous force, but also many other parts of the world. And part of the reason for that has been this globalization. Now, unfortunately, with this globalization, we have not adjusted the way we run the world. Most of the institutions we have developed are from 1944, which were the Bretton Woods institutions. And these actually were done at that time by about 40 countries. And that gave us the OECD, or the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank, but they're very much representing a part of the world, frankly, not the total world. And as a result, we find ourselves in a vacuum of governance. Global issues difficult to attack. The war in Syria has become a soap opera on television. The Ukraine crisis not being solved, the South China Seas. Global issues like the financial industry or climate change. The European crisis. Many of these things are not anymore discussed in the right forums because the forums simply don't exist. And politics increasingly becomes managing the next 3 months. Lack of global governance, trend number 1. The second trend really is, not surprisingly, digitization of society. It's a great thing that we've connected half of society already on mobile phones, for sure, internet now, and it's rapidly giving people access to many things. The financing, not far from here, the M-Pesa would be a good example of that. Access to education, farmers can see what their prices for their crops are, they can cut out the middleman, we can lift up people out of poverty because of technology. That's an incredibly good thing. But technology, again, has also made it far more difficult for governments to govern. Whilst we live in a time that wealth might be more and more concentrated in fewer people, technology actually has dispersed the power of the people. And it becomes very, very difficult to govern in that environment. And because of technology and the things that we have thrown at us, we tend to orient ourselves very quickly in little groups with the same thinking. We don't expose ourselves anymore to the broader thinking. It's all concentrated in 140 characters that you see on the screen there. The Brexit campaign was a great example of that. More emotions and sound bites with very short sentences than the opportunity to discuss these issues in depth and long term. But the digitization of society, concentration of wealth, dispersion of power, makes it also more difficult to govern. And the third trend, which is not surprising to you, is the era of abundance, which I call it. The way that we've grown these economies in many parts of the world, like in Europe and the US, is really pushing the planetary boundaries. We only have one planet Earth, and according to WWF, we already use resources of 1.5 planet Earth. And this is in a world, by the way, where the resource use is not very well developed. The footprint of a cat in Europe is a higher carbon footprint than a person in Africa. 1.5 billion people of this world use 75% of the world's resources, and the bottom 1 billion people, only 1%. But they all aspire to live like the others. The model of consumption that we have created is simply not sustainable anymore. We're hitting these planetary boundaries. Johan Rockström, who runs the Resilience Institute in Stockholm, talks about 9 planetary boundaries. Climate change, biodiversity, nitrogen levels are already beyond what we call the minimal acceptable levels. And increasingly, we are seeing, obviously, that because we're hitting these planetary boundaries, we are incurring already enormous costs in society. And again, it's especially the poor that suffer from this. It's a development issue more than anything else. And you in this part of the world will be very well aware of this. And increasingly, so you will pay the price of climate change, especially because many people here haven't built up resilience yet. Most people have a high percentage of their income that goes to food, which will see incredibly volatile prices. We just were in Africa last week alone. The enormous droughts in South Africa have moved food prices up in many of the commodities by 50 to 100%. And it's again the poor that will suffer. So it's a development issue. It was Hubert Reeves, the philosopher in Canada, who said that man is the most insane species. He worships an invisible God, but destroys a visible nature, not realizing that the visible nature he destroys is the invisible God he worships. And that is really what we are doing. So these trends coming together make it very difficult to govern, make it very difficult to attack these issues, and yet the burning platform is higher and higher and higher. That's why 2015, in the end of the day, was a very good year. Because two things happened in 2015 that give me a little bit more confidence despite all the things I shared with you. In September last year, 193 countries came together at the United Nations and signed the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the continuations of the Millennial Development Goals. First 15 years are done. Halving the number of people in poverty. But now we have to finish the job. We didn't go halfway to the moon and returned. We went all the way. We don't stop soccer matches at halftime. Eugene Bolt, when he ran the 100 meters, didn't stop at 50 meters either. We finished the job. We have now an opportunity to irreversibly eradicate poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way in the next 15 years. And that is what the Sustainable Development Agenda is all about. It's about people. It's about the planet. It's about peace. It's about partnership. It's about prosperity. It's a pact for the common good. It's the only moral framework, in my opinion, that we now have in a world where global governance is difficult. And the countries of this world, including Nigeria, rose to the challenge and signed the Sustainable Development Goals, 193 countries. And then the first test of these 17 goals that you might be familiar with, goal number 1, obviously, poverty alleviation. Goal number 2, hunger. Goal number 13 is climate change. And the first test came with the COP21 in Paris, where the countries, the same countries in the world again, decided that we have to bend this trajectory of going towards a 4-degree warming and bending that to stay below 2 degrees. Even below 2 degrees, the IPCC, which issues all the climate studies, would say there is a 1/3 chance that we exceed this and have the enormous consequences of climate change. You would not even take a 1/3 chance in crossing the street or a 1/3 chance in an airplane if you knew that that is the risk you took in not arriving. Why would you do that with climate change? So what we are trying to do is absolutely important, but even in Paris, where we had a reasonable agreement, it's just the first step of something that we need to set the bar much higher on. A 2% warming globally, by the way, doesn't mean 2% everywhere. For Africa, it more likely means 3 or 4%. 3 or 4% has enormous consequences. Just a 1.5% increase in the oceans, the coral reefs will be gone. Since the Paris Agreement signed in December, 25% of the Great Barrier Reef has already died off again. So we're playing with these planetary boundaries. And we're playing with it very fast. And in the battle between man and nature, nature is going to win. What you understand better in Africa than anywhere else, you have to live in harmony. This Ubuntu concept that you have is also with your nature. It comes actually from this part of the world more than anywhere else, but we've just forgotten it. So if these are the pressures, what do we need to do? The good thing is we now have the Sustainable Development Goals and then the responsibilities of delivering it. The first one was in Paris, as I mentioned, in December, where all the countries of the world signed the commitment to stay below 2 degrees. By the way, we've never had so many countries sign in the UN any agreement. The last agreement was 20 years ago with the Law of the Seas that was signed by 122 countries, now 193 countries. But now the work starts. You don't build reputations by what you sign or what you say. You build reputations by what you do. And my argument is very simple. We're in this together. I'm a father. I have 3 sons. I'm not the CEO. I happen to make a living by doing a job as a CEO, but I'm a citizen of this world above all. And we have this joint responsibility to put the interest of the common good now ahead of our own interests. If there is one definition of sustainability in my mind, It is that people that don't believe in sustainability put their personal greed ahead of the future of their children, as you rightfully said. We have to rise to the challenge to put the interest of others now ahead of our own. And actually by doing so, interestingly, we will be better off. Now, it's very important that business gets involved. Why? Because business is 60% of the GDP, 80% of the financial flow, and 90% of the job creation. It would be ludicrous to think that governments alone can handle this agenda in any part of the world. That's why there is goal number 17, carefully crafted in the SDGs around partnership. A partnership for the common good. And business has a key interest for several reasons. First of all, there absolutely is no business case in poverty. There is no business case in poverty. Any business that doesn't contribute to developing a society blocks its own progress by doing so. And secondly, the only reason for businesses to exist, the only purpose for business ultimately, is to serve society. If businesses would forget that purpose and become myopic for their own interest or for the shareholders, they probably won't have a long life. And the reason for that is very simple. Why should society accept businesses that don't contribute to society? Why would you accept people in your circle of friends that would not contribute to make that circle of friends stronger? So a business without a purpose has no purpose. Because everybody became so myopically focused on the shareholders and quarterly reporting, the result has been that the average length of a publicly traded company in the US is now only 17 years and going down. Many companies have seen their market cap significantly being affected by not taking responsibilities towards making society a better place, or this world a better place to live. Twinkling with car engines costs you a third of your market cap. Not investing in maintenance in the well does the same. Selling horse meat instead of beef, or manipulating LIBOR or foreign exchange rates. And yes, the world has finally understood that it isn't anymore cool to buy a $1 t-shirt when the result is that 1,050 women die, as we have seen in the Rana Plaza factory collapse. By the way, 1,050 innocent women that knew that they were going in a factory that was irresponsibly built, had cracks in the wall, and was at risk of being collapsing. You know what these women got paid? 11 cents an hour. Lower than anywhere else. The next lowest country is Vietnam at 26 cents an hour. It's about as close as you can get to modern day slavery. And indeed, the world is saying that's not cool anymore. Companies that don't take a responsibility to become a positive contributor will increasingly be rejected. It's a survival strategy as a minimum. But obviously what I'm excited about is it's an enormous opportunity. It's an enormous opportunity. The Global Development Agenda to implement the SDGs is estimated to cost $2 to $3 trillion a year. Now that might sound a lot to you, it sounds a lot to me as well individually. But $2 to $3 trillion a year investment in a human development agenda to irreversibly eradicate poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way is very small investment for a big return. The global economy right now, difficult as it may be, is about $100 to $110 trillion. So we're only talking 2 to 3%. That's nothing. And the payouts are enormous. Investing $1 in nutrition in this part of the world, where still many people are stunted, 160 million children born every year, not getting enough nutrition in the first 1,000 days. In many of the Central African countries, that's 10 to 12% of their economy that will be affected, just by that alone. $1 invested in nutrition has a $17 return for society. Giving women the same opportunities as men in this world. Access to financing, education, land rights is an opportunity to unlock the global economy by $28 trillion. Providing green energy to everybody will unlock this continent alone by $12 trillion. The Global Development Agenda is probably one of the highest returns for investments that exist at a time when the world is desperately looking for growth, including in this wonderful country. So why is it that not more people jump on this? At Unilever, we've said we need to become a company that positively contributes to society if we want to exist long term. We've been around for over 100 years, we're going to be around for hundreds of more years, but only if we make a positive contribution to society. Less bad is not good enough anymore. CSR is fine, but it only brings you so far. We need to be sure now that the business models that we put out there truly address some of these major issues that we have in society. The issues of sanitation, the issues of hygiene, food security, the issues of access to water, the issues of youth unemployment. And the more you look at that, the more you see the enormous opportunities that are being offered to you. At Unilever, we said very simply, our business model, called the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, we're going to decouple growth from environmental impact. It seems so logical to me if we don't have the resources anymore. What gives me the right to steal from my children or theirs? Decouple growth from environmental impact and increase your overall positive impact. The unique thing about this plan is that we take it across the total value chain, from farm to fork. CSR usually stays within your offices or within your own manufacturing operations, your travel. This plan takes responsibility of the whole value chain. If you're in food, products like Blue Band or Knorr or Royco that we happen to sell, that means you have to work on ensuring that there is livelihood for farmers and a decent living. That there is no waste in the food chain. In Africa or Nigeria alone, 40% of the food that the farmer produces gets wasted on the land already. It means that you have to be sure that it's sustainable farming, called climate smart agriculture. You have to be sure, on the other hand, that you don't end up further aggravating the issues of deforestation. Half of the deforestation in this world is driven by the demand for food, because we've produced our agriculture in an unsustainable way. And on the other side of the value chain, you have to be co-responsible for the issues of obesity, which is probably one of the biggest epidemics, diabetes 2, that this world has ever seen. So you have to take responsibility of the total value chain, all your brands. That is our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. Since we started that, not surprisingly, we've actually seen our business do better, because we are becoming more relevant. Our brands become more relevant. Our people feel more motivated by doing more relevant work. And we're attracting more of the right investors who want to invest in relevant long-term businesses. Our reputation has gone up in GlobeScan, or in many of the countries that we operate. We're now being seen as either the most responsible or most desired employer. We're the number 3 most looked up company at LinkedIn now, after Google and Apple, with 1.8 million people applying. Especially the millennials, they want to be part of a company that has a purpose. They want to make a difference in life. Our costs have come down enormously. All of our factories are now run with zero waste to landfill. I find that normal. What gives me the right to dump things in the landfill for future generations to take care of it? But by thinking about it, by making your businesses different, thinking of waste as an input for someone else, moving to what some people call the circular economy, you actually save cost. You become more efficient. Your factories probably have better service levels. The people have a higher level of pride. It works. Interestingly, by the way, only 10% of our packaging in this world gets recycled. Africa doesn't have any recycling industry. So it ends up in landfills or it ends up in the oceans. In 30 years' time, the way we're going, there will be more plastic in the oceans than fish. It's not a good thing. It's certainly not a good thing when 1.8 billion people make their livelihoods off the oceans. So keep on going. And we're playing with the future of our children. But it's also an enormous opportunity. Just recycling in Europe alone, which is a very well-run part of the world relative to other parts of the world, in Europe alone, putting in a circular economy law, working with governments and businesses, they can save $1 trillion. $1 trillion to make their businesses more competitive. It builds reputation, it saves costs. It motivates your employees. When we in Unilever look at cost cutting, We don't say that's another savings program. Every company has those all the time, and they're not very motivating. I've done many of those. They're not very motivating. But if you say we're going to cut the waste of our food in our value chain because people are going to bed hungry, you'll get a different level of motivation. And you certainly will get different levels of results. Purpose drives business. Nothing better to do that than with your brands. We are a company of consumer goods, so we sell brands. All of our brands need to have a deep purpose. Lifebuoy, helping a child reach the age of 5 by the simple act of hand washing. Knorr, bringing nutrition to people. In this part of the world, it's iron, where you have big issues of anemia. Dove, women's self-esteem. Our Domestos household cleaning brand attacking the issues of open defecation, where still 1.4 billion people don't have access to toilets. Every brand, the social purpose, is an enormous opportunity. And the more you tap into that opportunity, the better you do. In any country in the world, by the way. And it drives innovation. Setting the standards higher by saying, hey, perhaps in the future we don't have that much water. Perhaps people can't wash themselves as much. Perhaps we cannot afford to use all these resources. We end up finding products, one-rinse water softeners, waterless shampoos, and many other things that actually make more sense. The biggest constraint to growth in the future will be these planetary boundaries. You might as well take that into your value chain and be ready for that before it comes, in my opinion, better than after it comes. You need business models that are long-term. We stop giving quarterly reporting, we change compensation systems to the long term. You cannot solve these problems with quarterly reporting. It's impossible. You need business models that are more transparent. Trust is low in this world. If we want to solve the issues and work together, we need to have a higher level of trust. That comes from transparency. Transparency builds trust, and that trust is the basis of prosperity. We put 50 targets out there. We put all of the projects on our websites. You can find out what's in our products. Transparency. A long-term business model. Feel comfortable with transparency. Also in these parts of the world, incredibly important, as you can imagine. And then partnership. It was Einstein who said the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. It doesn't work. We have to start working differently together to solve these major issues. So partnership is a very important part of that. Partnership for prosperity. Now, my final point is that we have all the solutions in our hands. We frankly don't need more PhDs. This world is awash with money. Since the crisis of 2006, 2007, 2008, we've put in 57 trillion more with quantitative easing. That hasn't given anything in growth in the global economy. And it's floating around like drunken sailors. We might as well put it to good use. In many parts of the world, the cost of money is zero, or in some countries even negative as a result of this. We might as well put it to good use. We don't need more PhDs, we don't need more money. What we need is human willpower, which, by the way, in itself is a renewable resource. We need leaders and trees, and that is where we're short in this world. Leaders that put the interest of others ahead of their own. Leaders that can work in partnership for the common good. Leaders that take a longer-term view. Leaders that are more purpose-driven. Those are people that first and foremost are human beings. The most important characteristic of leadership. A high level of awareness of what is going on in the world. But that alone is not enough. They also have a high level of engagement to do something about it. And then with a certain sense of humanity and humility. Now, this part of the world, why I like this is because you are full of those people. When we started the Sustainable Development Goal consultation processes, and Ngozi, by the way, your former finance minister, was part of the high-level panel. So was Ellen Surley from Liberia, Betty Maya from Kenya, and Graça Machel from South Africa. Of the 27 members, 4 of them were from Africa. And interestingly, 4 of them were wonderful women. We did the consultation process called The World We Want. Within a nanosecond, we had 1 million people responding what world they aspire to. Most of them young people. And yes, most of them from this part of the world. A part of the world, by the way, that has more human talent than anywhere else. A part of the world, by the way, that will very soon have 50% of the world's young. And the young people understand that they don't only want to be part of crafting their future, they want to actively craft it themselves and own it. And the more we create an environment where we can unlock the potential of the young as a starting point by simply including them in the design of their future, the better we're off. The sad part of Brexit, which I didn't want to talk here, is that if you look at the votes and the split of the votes, the majority of the young people decided to stay in Europe. They understood that being together in this future world is far more important than drifting apart. But it was again the self-interest of the older generation that said, no, I look after myself, not the future. I'm going to vote out. The same we've done with climate change. Probably one of the biggest intergenerational injustices that mankind has seen. Of us passing on a problem of significant dimensions, if we don't do anything about it, to the next generation. Just like we did with the enormous levels of debt that we have created. My simple plea to you is, whatever position you're in the world, whatever, if you're in academia, or if you're in business, or if you're trying to figure out what you're going to do as a student, put yourself to the service of others. You are here, even in a very challenging environment like Nigeria, where there are many challenges still to be solved. You are here because you probably belong to a very small part of the population that has climbed above that. Only 2% of the world population can live the way they want, can do what they want, can pick the jobs they want, can move around the way they want. For 98% of that population, that's still not the case. They have to worry if their children make it past the age of 5, if they will get a job, if they have food. 800 million people still going to bed hungry every day, not even knowing if they wake up the next day. 98% of the population is in that situation. If you belong to the 2%, simply put yourself to the service of the other 98. The more you do that, the more you give, the more you will prosper. If you seek enlightenment just to enhance yourself for your own benefits, you miss purpose. But if you seek enlightenment to help others, you are with purpose. My simple message to you is, go with purpose. And it does make a lot of economic sense as well. Thank you very much.